In the beginning. Wow. I mean, think about that opening line. Before anything, this story doesn't start in a stable or with a quiet birth. Nope. It kicks off in eternity itself.
All right, so let's get into it. We're about to walk through one of the most influential stories ever told, the story of Jesus, specifically from the perspective of the Gospel of John. And you got to know, this is way more than just a biography. It's like a persuasive argument, a story about light and life, and it's built from the ground up to convince you of something absolutely incredible.
So, let's call this Act 1. Right out of the gate, the story doesn't start small. It starts with this massive, cosmic claim. The author wants to make one thing crystal clear from the jump. To understand who this main character is, you can't start with his birth. No, you have to go back, way back, to his place at the very beginning of everything.
And how is he introduced? Not with a name, but with a title, the Word. In the original Greek, it was logos. And look, this isn't just a cool nickname, it is a huge statement. The author is basically saying, hey, you know God? Jesus is God's expression. You know the force that created the entire universe? That's him. And now, that same force is shown up, in the flesh, right here among us.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. How does the story bring in its first human witness? Enter John the Baptist. Now, he's a big deal in his own right, but in this story, his whole job is to be a signpost. He's constantly pointing away from himself, saying, nope, not me. It's not about me. He's just the voice out in the desert whose one mission is to point to Jesus and give him this really startling title, the Lamb of God.
All right, that sets the stage. Let's move into Act 2, because this is where the action really starts to pick up. Jesus begins his public ministry, and the author lays it all out for us through a series of, well, he calls them signs. And let's be clear, these aren't just random magic tricks. No, each one is a very specific, very symbolic act that's meant to pull back the curtain and show us who Jesus really is.
In fact, the author builds a huge chunk of his story around 7 of these key signs. You know, it starts with turning water into wine at a party, and it builds all the way up to the most dramatic one at the end. Each one is meant to be a glimpse of his glory, you could say. They're like these public displays of who he is on a divine level.
But here's the twist. And this is so important to the story. These incredible signs, they don't unite people. Not at all. They actually do the exact opposite. They draw a line in the sand. For every person who sees one and goes, wow, I believe, there's someone else, especially the religious leaders, who sees a huge threat. They see a guy breaking their sacred laws, like working on the Sabbath, and making claims that sound, to them, like blasphemy. And so, the tension just starts to ratchet up.
And this next part is a perfect example of that. So right after he performs that amazing sign of feeding 5,000 people with almost nothing, he doesn't just, take a bow and walk off. No, he immediately makes this direct, almost confrontational claim. He says, I didn't just give you bread. I am the bread of life. You see what he's doing? He's tying the miracle directly to his own identity. He's forcing everybody to make a choice about who they think he is.
So all this rising tension, it's all leading somewhere. Welcome to Act 3. The conflict has been bubbling just under the surface, but now Jesus performs one last unbelievable sign. And this is the one that pushes everything right over the edge. This is the point of no return. This is the moment that seals his fate and puts him on a one-way path to the cross. What was the sign? He raises his friend Lazarus from the dead. And the author is so specific here. He makes sure to tell us Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. This isn't just, someone who passed out. This is a body that has started to decay. It's a total reversal of death. It's easily his most public, most impossible to deny, and frankly, most provocative miracle yet. It's like he's looking death right in the face and saying, no. And yet, right in the middle of this incredible display of cosmic power, the story just stops. For this one tiny, powerful sentence, the shortest verse in the whole Bible, Jesus wept. Think about that. Right before he's about to conquer death itself, the narrative makes a point to show us his deep, profound humanity, his sadness, his grief over losing his friend. It's just this incredibly intimate moment right before the biggest display of his divinity. And that miracle, that was the last straw. The religious authorities, with the high priest Caiaphas leading the charge, they see his popularity just going through the roof, and they get scared. They think if this guy keeps going, the Romans are going to come down on us hard and we'll lose everything. So a decision is made. And it's not really about religion anymore. It's a cold, hard, political calculation. Caiaphas literally says it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to be destroyed. And that's it. From that day forward, the plot to kill him is officially on. And just like that, we're in Act 4. Throughout the story, Jesus has been talking about his hour, this moment that's coming. Well, the narrator tells us that hour is now here. This is the climax of the whole story: the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion.
And the change in tone is just so sudden, so stark. After all this time of public ministry, of signs and teaching, it all turns on a dime right here, in a garden, in the middle of the night. He's taken.
Everything starts moving so fast now. There's a last meal where he does the unthinkable. He acts like a servant and washes his disciples' feet. He gives them one last command: love one another. And then, the betrayal. One of his inner circle, Judas, hands him over. And just like that, he's standing before the most powerful man in the region, the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate.
And in this incredible scene, Jesus tells Pilate that his whole reason for being here is to testify to the truth. And Pilate, this jaded, powerful politician who holds Jesus' life in his hands, he just responds with this incredibly world-weary, cynical question: what is truth? And then he just walks away, leaving that question hanging in the air. He doesn't even wait for an answer.
I mean, look at the absolute contrast here. You have the official legal authority, the Roman governor himself, saying over and over again, I find nothing wrong with this man. He's innocent. He can't find a crime. But on the other side, you have the chief priests who've whipped the crowd into a total frenzy, and they aren't shouting for justice. They're screaming for an execution. And in the end, Pilate just folds. He caves to the pressure.
And from the cross, the author gives us Jesus' final words. And they're not a cry of agony or defeat. They're a declaration. It is finished. See, in the way this story is told, this isn't the end. It's the completion of a mission. It's the finishing of the work he came to do. And with that said, he breathes his last.
But that is not where the story ends, not even close. For the writer of this gospel, the cross isn't the final curtain, it's the doorway. It's the gateway into Act 5. This isn't an ending, it's the start of a whole new creation.
So, the final act kicks off early on Sunday morning. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, probably just to grieve and perform the final burial rites, but when she gets there, the massive stone is rolled away, and the tomb is empty. The body is gone. So the first report that spreads isn't he's alive. It's confusion, panic, someone's stolen the body.
But then, he starts to appear. First, he appears to a weeping Mary in the garden. Then, he shows up to his disciples, who are literally hiding in a locked room, terrified for their lives. And finally, he appears to the one we all know as Doubting Thomas, the one who said, I won't believe it unless I see it myself. And when Thomas sees the wounds, he makes what is maybe the most powerful statement of belief in the entire book: my Lord and my God.
And this is where the author basically pulls back the curtain and speaks directly to us, the audience. He tells us flat out why he wrote this whole thing. This wasn't just for the history books. He says, look, I wrote all this down for one reason, so that you, yes, you, the one reading this right now, so that you might believe that Jesus is exactly who this story says he is, the Messiah, the Son of God.
And he closes with this incredible promise. That's also kind of a question. The whole point of believing, he says, is so that you can have life in his name. So after this epic journey, all the way from the dawn of time to a brutal cross and an empty tomb, the entire narrative leaves us with this one final thing to chew on. What exactly is this life he's promising? And what does it really mean to find it?